like to welcome each and every individual to Voices of Integrity for Business Owners and Employees podcast. And today, Kevin and I are going to be having an interesting conversation because I always enjoy talking with Kevin. He's got an interesting perspective, good guy. And so, Kevin, you got a chance to go ahead and watch the podcast for, a hard work ethic. And so what'd you think of that? Did it make sense, not make sense? Any thoughts at
Uh,
all?
I thought it made sense. Pretty much agreed with most of it. um, so yeah,
One of the things, sorry, go ahead.
no. I was gonna say no negative feedback here.
Okay. So one of the things that's interesting is that, often we see different vantage points. You probably won't hear me say that I disagree with anyone,
hmm
um, because a disagreement is kind of, if I say I disagree with somebody, it's kind of arrogant. What I'm saying is that I understand what they're saying. And the truth is, they probably don't even understand what they're saying. So, so if they don't understand what they're saying, how am I going to understand what I'm saying? So what I tend to do is I tend to say, that's interesting perspective. I have a different perspective.
hmm
And so I think it's when you're looking at multi-generational, so I just turned 60 recently, and so I've got 7 kids, and six out of the seven are all in the age group, where they're Gen X, I think is what it's called. And so they're all in that group. And so I think generations often have a hard time communicating, different things. And so, like, what were one or two of the things, Kevin, that you found in that video that you found to be beneficial?
Um, I guess like just the way they were raised, because I think they mentioned that. Um, like I guess where you come from influences like the way you are, so to speak.
Right?
So
Like, like it's weird because like my mom and dad, my mom said to me once, um, I was right before I got married, so I was 20 years old, and so it was right before I got married, and she said, "Mark, I'm concerned that you're not going to go ahead and spend the time with your wife and your future kids that you should be." And she said, you come from very hard work ethic family, both sides. So both my mom and dad,
hmm
especially physically, just my gracious, always working. And she said, come from really strong work ethic, and you've taken it to another whole dimension. Like it's a whole, like you're a monster. Like when I was
yeah.
in high school, I had, during the summer, I had 2 full-time jobs and I had 3 part-time jobs. I'm 16, 17, 18 years old. So when, I had to pay for my own college, so I understood that. So I had to save up for that. Wanted to buy a car, so I saved up for that and paid cash for that. And then I also, knew at 14 and 15, I started saving up for my first house. Um, and so I don't know. I just, so it's just, so working 50, 60, 70, 100 hour weeks, no big deal. This is just what happened. And what's interesting is even with 7 kids, I'd get up to 110 hours a week, and I never missed one of their baseball games or softball games or events or anything. I mean, I think even at 110-hour weeks, I still had a balanced life. I didn't get to play golf like I used to, and so I had to give up and sacrifice some of those things. Um, so it's interesting. I don't know if I shared the story in that podcast about when I was in college and I was taking 18 credit hours. Did I share that one? Do you know? Do you remember?
I think you might have. Yeah.
Okay. So I don't want to share it again. So did you have a different perspective on anything?
Um, I'm really not sure. It's just interesting again, like their thought process compared to like mine.
Okay.
So It's just different.
Right. So like how do you process that? Like how do you process the differences? So
Hmm.
they're thinking one way, you're thinking another way. I'm thinking like they're thinking. Is it generational thing? It might be generational thing. Is it good or
Yeah.
bad? It might be good or bad. Or it might just be different, right? Just because
Hmm.
something's different doesn't mean one's good and one's bad. Um, and so I think one of the things that's hard is often we have a hard time having communications, like honest communications, with, one another. So how do you, when you say you think differently, help me understand that if you could.
Like the whole thing of like, oh, your parents, like you get it from your parents. Well, that's fine for them, but on my end, I had to just figure it out on my own. Like they came from like a completely different country, so nobody really like their hard ethic is like more labor, whereas like my thought process is like, how do I set myself up for like success, like work without having to like do that hard labor, like you know what I mean, like
I do.
so you can't really compare that when it comes to like everyone's
Do.
just going to be different.
Yeah, no, I do understand. Actually, so my dad was raised on the farm, and um, so he was a physically hard worker.
Hmm.
And so I once had somebody say to me that there's some, that he had heard that, some general wanted, lazy people because lazy people tend to go ahead and find more efficient ways to do things. I'm not saying that's wrong. I read the article and it's like actually the general wanted to put those people on the front line.
Hmm.
Right? And so I think that, working smarter and harder. Like how do we do that? Like how do we see success? Like one of the 500 natural laws in the DNA for success, the natural laws. One of those is values in life. So we all have different values in life, and what I have found is it's pretty easy to have success in one. Like your values, likely different from mine, and that's totally okay.
Hmm.
My values in life is number one is my relationship with God. That's not religion, that's spirituality or whatever you want to say it. It's not Christian or Muslim or Buddhist or atheist. It's just, it's a relationship with my creator. Number two is going to be relationship with my wife. Number three is going to be relationship with my 7 kids and family. And number four is economic engine. And then number five, how to my career. And number six is, or number five is going to be impacting the community, impacting the world. Um, and what I have found is, I've been an international speaker and author, traveled all around the world, all different cultures, all different types of groups and everything. What I have found is I have found that it's fairly easy to see success in one area of life, but you know, mm, see success in all areas. It's just hard.
Yeah, it's
You know,
borderline impossible.
right? I mean, like but I have found that when I'm like in the next dimension principle too, like I can't wait for you to get into the dedication one and see what you think about that.
Hmm.
Um, and then the next one after that is going to be, I believe, the quantum or the next dimension principle, where it's talking about, where it's talking about dimensional thinking. So once you get to a 10 in work ethic,
Hmm.
you move to the next dimension. And so, so it's like a 2 in the next dimension is higher than a 9 in the previous dimension. So I can think I'm a 10 on work ethic, but then when I work next to somebody else, I might think, wow, I'm only a 2. It's funny, Patty was sharing a story about when she first was, into the firm. And I
Hmm.
guess she and Fred were in the same room and she stopped typing or stopped keyboarding or something. And he's like, is everything okay? And so there's something that creates success, and it doesn't matter what generation it is. It doesn't matter, there's just certain things that create, success. I'm trying to find not finding the value in time. So there's a number of different, this one here is in the business arena, and there is an internalization model. So when we look at how do we have clarity, I think a lot of people these days, a lot of individuals these days, like they're looking at what's their purpose in life, which I think is a really good thing. Like what am I put on this planet to do? What are my goals? What are my dreams? What do I want to do? And so Tom Coons, he's the most recent past president of Century 21. It's the largest real estate franchise in the world. And then Peter Miles, the past board member of BMW, past president of Rolls-Royce. So those two guys, myself and a number of other people, did did a series and kind of came up with the internalization model. And so I was saying to Tom once, and I said, I'm so frustrated. He says, what are you frustrated about? I'm like, well, people say they get it. Like, I understand what you're saying, Mark. And I'm like, I'm not even sure if I understand what I'm saying. Like, I'm pretty sure they don't,
Yeah.
And he just kind of spontaneously said to me, he's like, I'm like, I don't understand why people, and I don't know how I'm supposed to say, like, if somebody says I understand, I can't really come back and say, I don't think you do. Like, that kind of offends people a little bit. So I don't know what to say. And I said, I don't know why they're saying that. He says, oh, it's simple, Mark. It's because they're not internalizing what you're saying. And I said, and I could feel it like resonance with me. I could feel that what he was saying was right. And I immediately said, so Tom, like, how do I get people to internalize things? He's like, oh, I don't know. I'm like, what? And I went to bed that night. My brain was just in overdrive. And I woke up the next morning with this model, right? I got out of bed and I just took a piece of paper beside the bed and pen, and I just wrote this whole model out. And it's a really interesting model. So if we want something clear, like you're looking to be a partner at some point in the future, which I think is really great. Our first interview, first time I talked to you, I'm like, man, this guy, man, he's got a lot of potential. Holy cow. I don't think it's going to take him as long to become a partner as what he does. I think he can do it. I think he can shortcut the cycle. And so, but we have to go from being unclear to clear, which is engineered clarity. And so to do that, we ask questions, and then we learn to listen at a higher dimension. That gives us the ability to see things that we haven't seen before, which helps us to see our true intentions, which often are pretty selfish, honestly, which is not necessarily bad. That then gives us the ability to think differently, which then gives us new capability, which then helps us to internalize things. And we know we've internalized something when we do something, and then that produces a result. Then we built that model, and then we looked at this one right here and spun it down and drilled it down deeper. And so this is the internalization model. And so the internalization model starts out with either an awakening or a question. And so questions can create awakenings, or awakening can create questions. So kind of this goes from surface down into deep. Does that make sense?
Okay.
And so,
Kind of.
like, yeah. So there's a lot here. It's like, oh my gracious, it's overwhelming, but in a good way, I think. So if you said I want to be a partner in a CPA firm, and I want to do that, let's say in 10 years, and I say, Kevin, I think I can help you do that in 3 years, 3 times faster. It's like, well, how would we do that? Well, if we learn how to accelerate, like I remember when I turned, 40, I had this like thought all of a sudden, like nobody until I was 40, nobody said I was smart, not even my mom. Like nobody said I was a smart person. Then at 40, it was weird. All of a sudden I turned 40 and everybody started telling me how smart I was. Well, in your first 40 years of life, nobody tells you you're smart. When they tell you you're smart, you're not sure how to respond. Like I probably shouldn't laugh and disappoint them. Like I don't really see myself as being that smart. And so, but I remember a thought that I had. I said, man, I wish I knew at 20. ugh, what I know at 40.
Mm-hmm.
And then I thought, I bet you when I turn 60,
You gonna say the same thing?
I'm going to say the same thing. That's exactly right. I'm going to say the same thing. I'm going to say, dang, I wish I knew at 40 what I know at 60. And I'm like, well, I don't want to wait until 60 to go ahead and learn what I need to learn. I need to learn, I need to learn faster.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, how am I going to accelerate that learning? And I said, after some thought, I said, I, I think what I need to do is I think I need to find men in business and women too, but especially men because I'm a man. And so find men in business that are 60 or in life and ask them what they wish they knew at 40.
And
So I
that's when you got
started,
into golfing, I'm assuming, and you started talking to people.
well, that's one thing, right? That can be one thing. That's a great way to grow business and networks and stuff like that. So that's one reason I met Tom because I was
Mm-hmm.
intentional about doing that. And so I started studying that, studying men and asking them the question, say, hey, I'm 40. What do you're 60 or whatever they were. What do you wish you knew at 40? And they started telling me that. So there's a number of young guys that I'm mentoring that are in their 20s. And so they're starting to ask people who are 40,
Mm-hmm.
like, what do know? Now I just turned 60 recently. So they can ask me, Mark, what do you know? What do you know at 60 that you wish you knew at 20? And there's a lot. I mean, there's just a lot. So what that can do is accelerate the learning. So the next generation can see faster success because they're building on the wisdom and knowledge that I have. And so that's just asking questions. And so that's kind of the first part. Then learning to listen at a deeper level. And then that connects into, our why. There's a book out there, I think it's Learning My Why or Knowing My Why. Great book. It's really being able to understand, like, who am I? Like, what do I want in life? And then how does my economic engine, how does my career fit into that? And then that helps us to see things, that gives us insights that then purifies our intentions to, again, realize we're not that smart. We're not that hard workers. We're not that kind. We're not that giving. We're not that spiritual, righteous. We're not that good. So when we realize that I'm not that smart, I learn at a faster rate. When I go ahead and say I don't work that hard, then I work at a faster rate. My parents were probably the hardest working people, physically working people, but I think in some of the other areas in life, maybe they weren't. Like maybe with relationships, I wouldn't say that maybe they worked all that hard at relationships. I think they were around people that, they felt comfortable with. And so this leads to radically thinking differently. So radically thinking differently, okay, totally outside of the way that I'm thinking. The biggest breakthroughs I've had in my 39 years of marriage or with my 7 kids or career wise, like how was I able to go ahead and go from 100% straight commission position, at 23 years old, making $1 an hour, to where 3 years later, I was on track to make $460,000 a year, having partnership in the firm. So I accomplished my 7-year goal in a year and a half. I accomplished like my 15, 20-year goal, in 3 years. And so it's like, how did I accelerate that? And so it's learning to think radically different than other people who are 23 years old. That then gives me the ability to have leverage, which then gives me new capabilities that helps me to change. And we change through internalization. So if somebody isn't changing, they're not internalizing things. And then that leads to doing things. And then I had this whole model, like when I woke up, the whole model was here. The only thing that wasn't here was this last piece. It was blank. And I'm like, okay, I go through all of this here. And then I do all of this. And after I do something, this last piece was empty. And I shared it in a podcast with Peter Miles. And he's like, oh, that's simple. I'm like, what am I missing? He says, failure. So you go through, and immediately I'm like, that's so true about life. You go through all of this here, and then you fail. And then you get it. Like the humility, like I'm not that
Mhm.
smart. I'm not that righteous. I'm not entitled. And then all of a sudden you start all over again. And it's just this cycle of going back through. And so for me, for me, this has helped me understand. Have you ever read Think and Grow Rich?
Yeah.
Um, so that like he studied the great people. So I think with Fred and Patty, you studying them and studying other people and saying, what is it that created success? Like Tom Kuntz went ahead and like he didn't have a degree, ended up running the largest real estate franchise in the world. He didn't have a degree, a college degree. And that was one of his goals. So how do we set goals? And then how do we figure out how to do those goals and all of that kind of stuff? And and then, he went ahead and he observed EQ, high EQ, emotional intelligence, and he saw somebody that was successful and he went to him and he said, I seen that everybody respects you and you're really successful in the company. What are your secrets? And the guy said, claim unclaimed territory. And Tom says, what does that mean? He said, son, so he was older. Tom was much
Hmm.
younger. He said, son, he said, when you have an opportunity wherever you're working, there's going to be territory, there's going to be things that aren't being done. Jump in and claim those things. Do those things. Even if you don't know how to do them, even if you don't get paid to do them, just do those things. Everything you can possibly do, claim unclaimed territory. And he said, you might not get recognition for it. You might not even do it right. You likely are not going to get paid for it initially, but do it anyways, because it will always help you succeed in the future. Other questions, Kevin,
Nope.
on this?
Nope. I don't have any.
Yeah, so this is, the next one, it's good that you've got the work ethic and looking at that. And, what do you think about that? And I would manage up and out to Patty and Fred and Elise and Elaine and myself. And, what did you learn from this? What action will you take from it? And what do you think you need to learn next? You don't need to worry about impressing any of us. Don't tell us what we want to hear. Tell
Hmm.
us what you really think about. If you think it sucks, say, hey, I think it sucks. Like it's not going to offend me. To give a different
So what I'm
perspective,
thinking is if I could somehow reach that goal quicker, how come people that have been here haven't reached that goal?
right?
You know what I mean? Like it's
Right?
not that doesn't make sense.
Or does it?
I don't
Like,
think it does. And then
right.
there's like barriers too to like,
Are you
yeah, you could
familiar
try
with
your
Roger
hardest, but
Bannister?
no.
So Roger Bannister is the first human being that ever broke the 4-minute mile. Physicians of his day, when it had medical professionals, the experts, there's so many experts that know so many things. And they said you
Hmm.
couldn't break, the human being could never break the 4-minute mile. It's physically impossible. They said a human being will never be able to do it. And then he did it. And after he did it, there's like, I don't know, the next year, there's 17 people that did it. So it's how, just because somebody hasn't done it doesn't mean it can't be done. It just means
Hmm.
it's not normal. But if you're going to be normal, normal is way overrated. And so, has anybody wanted to do it? Has anybody been willing to do the work that's required to do it? Has anybody been willing to make the sacrifice that's, that's required to do it? Has anyone been able to take the risk that's been able to? It's a great, see, your question is awesome. That's what I'm saying. Like your question is awesome because when you have that question, that's subconsciously kind of holding you back to say, well, nobody else has done it. I mean, nobody else in the company I was with, nobody else went ahead and was promoted to a regional manager, marketing manager, vice president of sales. Nobody else made the money that I made. Nobody else advanced the way I advanced. Like nobody had ever done it before I had done it. And so the mindset is if nobody else has ever done it, that's really exciting because I'm going to be the first one to do it. Sorry, you're going to say something else.
No, I was gonna say the other thing's probably like barriers to like learning. Like you can't learn if there's no like guide, like there's no procedure set in stone place like in there, you know what I'm saying? Like it's still being built on.
Right. This is
So
what's really cool too. So
like one of the things that goes on my head is like, has there been like a younger person like me who like was previously here? Like how did they like fare off? You know, like did they struggle? Did they have notes? Did they
no, I know what you're talking about.
It's
When
like
I went
because I
ahead
think
and
of like a couple people and they're like, oh yeah, this person comes from like 20 plus years of like auto experience. I'm like, all right, well that's an old, more mature person. Then it's like, oh, this person came from like 5 different jobs. Like, so I'm like, has anybody started with like a couple years of experience, like
right,
right out of college? Like, is that?
right. Yeah. Um, when I was, when I was 23, I started the position, the straight
Mhm,
commission position. I had 6 jobs coming out of college, so I didn't have to go into it. It was the thing I didn't like and I wasn't good at, but I knew I wanted to double income on, one income because I wanted my wife to be able to not have to work outside the home.
mhm,
And so when I started with the company, there was a vice president of sales, super nice guy. He had like, I don't know, 35 years of experience in sales.
mhm,
The marketing manager had over 20 years of experience, and I did exactly what they said to do. Like I did exactly what they said. They said it, I did it. They said it, I did it. They said it, I did it. And after 3 months, I'm making $1 an hour. My wife is now 6 months pregnant. We bought a house, which was nice, but we couldn't afford to put curtains on the house, so we put bed sheets on it to do it. And I go into the president of the company, I pound on his desk, and I say, Tony, I'm doing everything you guys are telling me to do. None of it's working. Like none of it's working. I had no sales experience. I had no experience in the industry. Like
mhm.
nothing. I came with less to the job than you have with yours. And he's like, he kind of looked at me, he kind of laughed, and he said, well, Mark, it really takes 12 to 18 months to see success in this business. And I said, Tony, I don't have 12 to 18 months. I got a wife who's pregnant, 6 months pregnant. I've got a house. And he said something that changed my life forever. And he said, so, Mark, what do you think you ought to do? So they had a path, but it wasn't creating success fast enough for me. And I said, well, I think I ought to do this, this, and this. He said, well, go do it. And I said, okay. Um, and so I did that. And that's when everything started to change. So I took what was working and I just built on that. And that's what created the success. And so they didn't have training. I had 2 days of training and I was thrown out in the field. I built an entire training system, an entire system so I just built everything. So what wasn't there, I built it. If it was
Mhm.
there, I built on it. If it was there and it wasn't working, I fixed it. If there was nothing there, then I went ahead and created it. So Napoleon Hill says, you know, the writer of, Think and Grow Rich, he said, I think it was him that said, or Jim Rohn, one of them said, um, and Henry Ford said it as well. If you think you can do a thing, or if you think you can't, either way, you're right. So the mind is really, really powerful,
Mhm.
crazy powerful. And so if we think we can see success, if we do the right actions in the right way over the right period of time, we'll see success. Now, I don't know if it's 3 or 4 years. I don't know if it's that. I believe it is. I believe with your talent, your gifts, how we interviewed the first time, but it's important to follow the system. And so, like in these things here, um, you know, understanding it's how to think. What's the difference? What's the difference between becoming a partner in 3, 4, 5 years than being a partner in 10 or 15 or 20 years. It's how people think. It's how people think. So Tom, another story, he says, he's a golfer, and he says, so he put a lot of money into all the golfing stuff, all the greatest clubs, everything. He said, my golf game still wasn't that great. And he, so he brought, hired a golf pro, and this golf pro was a lot younger than he was, a lot younger, less experienced and everything, but he's a golf pro. And so they went out and exchanged pleasantries on the driving range. And the golf pro said, "Hey Tom, give me the club get the club in your bag that doesn't work." And Tom's like, "What do you mean?" He's like, the one that goes left or right, never goes straight. Tom's like, "Well, that's pretty much all my clubs." He's like, "Well, give me the one that's the worst." So the golf pro drops the ball, lines up the club, whacks this thing a mile down the middle of the driving range. And the golf pro looked at the clubs, looked at Tom and said, "Tom, good news. The clubs aren't the issue."
It's your technique.
Right. It's your technique. And so it's how we think. And so I think the challenge is like, it took me a lot longer to see success in business, and I saw success very fast compared to my peers. Why? Because I wanted something much more than my peers, and I wanted it in shorter time, and I was willing to do the work, make the sacrifice, and take the risk to do it. But when I look back, I think, boy, if I would have had somebody like me, or if I'd have had somebody like Fred and Patty, if I'd have had somebody that like Tom or Peter, like if I'd have had somebody that could have guided me, I had to figure it all out on my own. So I didn't understand how to be a good student. I didn't understand the work. I didn't understand the dedication. I didn't understand the next dimension principle. And we'll be doing a number of these podcasts. And so they're only roughly, 15 minutes to a half an hour. So they're not very long.
Mm-hmm.
And so the faster you get through these, maybe next time you and I chat about some of these different ones, because I love your questions. Those are valid questions. And so if we learn how to think differently about how we're thinking, that's going to create faster success. So an exceptional podcast, Kevin. Thank you for participating. If you're listening to the rebroadcast of this, you have any questions, connect with the individual invited you to participate, or you can call toll-free 888-230-2300 outside the U.S. 630-393-9909. And always remember, we can accomplish so much more together than we ever could on our own. Have an amazing day. Bye-bye.